I met Annie several weeks ago now. As you guys are obviously aware, we are on the House Oversight Committee in Congress in the middle of a major investigation as relates to Jeffrey Epstein and his horrific crimes. I really want to thank Annie for her courage to come to DC with other survivors and share their stories to members of Congress, which we did at a roundtable. This is a really big story. It's a big national, international story, but it affects like real people. And it is a network that spanned very powerful men around the world, including men that are still alive and in power today.
Just a little bit about, my story. I was 18 years old when my older sister, Maria, was attending a graduate program in New York. She managed to pull it off despite, kind of moving to New York with like $100 in her pocket. Basically, she gets into this really reputable program and starts connecting with people in the art world. And through that, she's introduced at an opening to Epstein and Maxwell, and is told, by the dean of her program, these are people that are important to know. I'd encourage you to sell your work to them, and that kind of thing. And she mentions that she has this younger sister. She was 10 years older than me. And that, I was beginning to look at colleges and thinking about, how to pay for them. When she mentions that she, sort of knows, it sounds like a Daddy Warbucks situation as it's described, right? This really wealthy man who he really cares about helping young people get their education. He'd love to meet you. He wants to fly you to New York. I was just really excited. And so I fly there. And it's a lot of grooming, right? And so it's really one of the reasons that I felt like important for me to share my story is that I think it does a good job of illustrating the grooming aspect of these kinds of crimes. And then at the end of the weekend, he invites us to go to a movie, and my sister and I go to see this movie with him. And during the movie, he starts, grabbing my hand and holding my hand, and then, caressing my leg. And I just felt so confused about what was happening because, I had no template for understanding this kind of behavior. I'd never experienced that with an older man before. He suggested I go on a weekend trip to New Mexico with him and his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. And so I immediately had this bad feeling in my stomach because of what had happened in the movie theater, but I also thought he wouldn't do anything because his girlfriend was there. So I take this trip, and the weekend there is really a mix of, kind of these highs and lows, right? Like they take me shopping in Santa Fe, and then they're doing things, she's sitting me down and showing me how Jeffrey likes his feet rubbed, and she's got one foot and I should take the other, and he's moaning, and it's just all very like, this doesn't seem right, but I also don't know how to label this or understand it. A big part of his fortune came from Les Wexner, a billionaire that lives in Ohio that owned like Victoria's Secret and Unlimited and all these, massive stores. And so my sister had been given this opportunity to go to his residence for the summer so that she could just focus on her painting, is what she was told. While she's there, Epstein and Maxwell come to visit, and something similar happens to her where she's assaulted. Right? And she also has photos stolen from her. She confronted them, and it was a big fight. And, and she basically tries to leave, tries to call the security. Security says, we work for Wexner. We don't want to hear any of this. It's not until she has my dad drive to the property from states away that she's actually even able to leave. So she goes back to her apartment. She makes the call, and she says everything. She talks about what happened to her, what happened to me, what happened to the photos, but also who she'd observed, that she'd observed Trump there, that she'd observed Clinton there. And we don't know what happened with that because there's never been they have never shared anything about that report. But I moved to Texas in 2006, and shortly afterwards, FBI showed up and they're now doing the investigation. And so this is, we think, okay, well, it's kind of scary, but tell your story. Finally, they're taking it seriously. And after I did, what was really, heartbreaking was that the two agents said, because they could tell I was questioning myself still about, what had happened. And they said, really, just so you know, like your story's very consistent with what so many young women, like there's been dozens of young women in Florida that have come on and talked about this. And also a reason it was so frustrating to hear Acosta's, testimony about, the inconsistent or the difficulties of credibility of the women, because the impression I had from the FBI agents was it was very consistent, right? There was a really strong case. Nothing happens, and then suddenly it's like Epstein's gotten this sweetheart deal that really I find out about like everything else in this case I'm finding out in the paper. Once again, like having parties with like famous Hollywood people and famous people in New York, and nobody seems to care that he was guilty of these crimes. 2019, Epstein's bail hearing, I happened to be in New York. I had already been, in talk with media many times and shared my story, but at that point, I had not shared my name. The judge says, we've learned that there's some victims in the courtroom and we're wondering if they want to speak about the possibility of bail. It was really the first time, in front of that courtroom with Epstein standing there, and the judge is asking me what happened to me. And I was still struggling to kind of put it into words, right? But I knew that this was a dangerous man and he should not be let out on bail. And so I, made that point, and Courtney did as well. And then he was kept, and we felt like it was a victory until, of course, we find out about his death. This was clearly negligence at the very least, right? Like, this is something you can prevent. And so that was another just like real slap in the face. In 2020, FBI starts calling us, all of us in. They did organize a chance for us to all come together and share our impact statements. And that was honestly an incredibly powerful event, because I heard over and over again from these women the whole trajectory of their lives had changed. I'm really, really grateful to you, Congressman, because honestly, I'm trying to just get information. I'm going online and I'm like, what's happening? And I came across like a couple of interviews you did where you were really speaking out. It made me feel so much better just to know that there were people that were, voicing outrage over these things, that we're talking about how suspicious it was, this trip to DC, which I think the thing that came out of it most for me was really the solidarity piece, like being with so many women, and many of whom have gone on to work at victim-focused organizations, to do education, to try and work on this issue in a broader way. It was just an incredible thing to get to be with them, and there's this sense of we're not begging people to listen to us anymore. We're just demanding that people pay attention and the government pays attention.
And obviously we want to make sure that there's accountability. From our perspective, we don't really care who is implicated. If you cause harm, then you need to be exposed. And I think, whether it was Trump that was coming by or Bill Clinton that was coming by or whoever it was, we don't care. What we care about is that if you harm people, that there's accountability to that.